Al's just taking in all the sights of autumn. Here's your spooky spot on McFarlane Toys Spawn Classic Covers Series 24, Issue 88, Halloween Spawn. The 24th series of Spawn action figures takes a more traditional route and focuses on interpreting various comic covers from the rich gallery of Spawn artwork. This unique approach will surely speak to core Spawn fans, as well as to provide an entry point for new collectors. Decided for this year's spooky spot I would delve back into some of the devilishly cool collectibles we looked at in earlier years. Like, for example, Spawn Classic Covers number 24, issue 88, coined by many as Halloween Spawn. The first time I looked at this figure was way back in a spooky spot of 2017. 5 years then have since passed, and I thought it was well due its time to have a look at this figure again. It doesn't hold up as well with all the years that have passed, literally and figuratively. The figure has some real tough time standing up. For that reason, and that reason alone, is why I've actually got still the figure resting against the tree. This is the way you will want to be displaying the figure. Keeping that, though, in mind, I'm going to go ahead and measure off just Spawn alone. He's about 7 inches in height, or he's about, I'd say, 18 centimeters tall. Of course, if you wanted to have the full package together, then you're factoring in the tree, and that gives you an overall display piece of about 9 inches in height, or about 23 centimeters tall. Yeah, really, the biggest issue with this figure isn't so much that it was translated to plastic, but rather that they decided to use issue 88 as a source material to create a figure from. I want to again stress the idea that this is an action figure. It does have posability, but for what limitations this figure does have, it should have easily just been released more as a statue than an actual figure. Just have everything attached the way you see it right now and just release it as a statue. It never should have really been an action figure. With that being said, let's go ahead and just move Spawn out of the way. And you'll already see what's happening here. As soon as I put him down and leave him on his own, the figure's going to fall completely over. We'll get back to Al in a moment. By the way, the tree comes actually in 2 parts when you first take this out of the clamshell casing. Separating it right now to show you the 2 parts. You get the main base, which we've already looked at, obviously, the first time around that we looked at this. I gotta say, I really like this cat. I can't tell whether the cat has been spooked or the cat is evil. In either way, this is a cat you may want to stay clear away from. Never let really a black cat cross your path. Isn't that one of those superstitions? Having already had a black cat, unfortunately it did pass away, but having a black cat, I can't say that I would ever have avoided crossing the path of a black cat or vice versa. But that definitely seems like a cat that's rather ticked off. I do like the sculpting for how dated this piece is. The cat is non-removable. It's already permanently attached to one of the tops of the jack-o'-lanterns. You can see several jack-o'-lanterns. There's actually 3 here. They all look like they're sagging, sad little jack-o'-lanterns. The coloring is a little more on the yellowish side. I like to prefer to instead have this actually more of a brighter orange. But the sculpting on the jack-o'-lanterns, for a little more dated as they are, actually are decent enough. I think really the only thing that suffers a bit on the jack-o'-lanterns, in fact, can you see this one right here? There we go. Is only just the fact that they used this color that they did. I find it too close perhaps to the twigs and all the leaves that make up the bottom of the base, that I think just by making it a brighter orange, it would have stood out just a little bit better. It looks as if they all used, obviously, the molded black plastic and then just went in there and painted over top of it. So it seems a lot darker than really what it probably should have been. They are glowing. You can see, in fact, like the eyes and the mouth are glowing on all of these. Well, this one's off. This one here is kind of on, I guess. There's still a candle flickering inside. But again, I probably would, again, must keep stating the obvious, color these a little bit brighter. Then, of course, you got some twigs, some leaves, and all the things that make up the rooted areas of the tree. You got a few little stones off to the side. And for what we see of the tree, until, of course, I add the extra part onto the top of it, it certainly works well as just a little stump. You could easily have used this, but there's nothing enough to rest against Al. You'll see right now, like if I was just to put the figure against just what we see right now, there's no way this would be enough to hold the figure upright. You definitely need this part. This part does all the work, unfortunately, when it comes to displaying the issue 88 Spawn. That if you were to buy this loose, if you were to say just buy this, and you were just to buy this, there's no way at all you'd be able to display the figure. Now, I think you're probably saying to yourself, well, couldn't use a display stand. No, unfortunately, you cannot. There is no holes on the bottoms of Spawn's feet. So you're going to, unfortunately, have to rely on the tree, again, to do all the work. The tree easily just attaches onto the top. Now, it's shaped specifically in a way that you have to only, if you twist it, say, this way, there's no way it's going to be able to fit into the shape. Like I said, it's a dedicated shape. Snapping that in place, making sure that you don't actually pinch the poor cat's tail. And that's what the rest of the tree looks like. It keeps pretty much quite gray here on the top. It has more of the yellowish orange down below here, but kind of just gives away completely all of that and just leaves it only more to a darker gray. Kind of the way that the comic cover does have it. You've got all these little vines and stuff that wrap around the limbs and all the individual branches of the tree. And then up at the top, you've got yourself a tiny little owl. And again, just as much like the cat, the owl does look kind of creepy, doesn't it? I think one little nice touch would also have been to color the eyes a brighter yellow or brighter white, something so that those eyes would have popped a little bit more than what they do. The owl is already attached to the limb. You don't have to worry about putting him in there. And obviously the cat is already attached to the jack-o'-lanterns. You don't have to worry about that either. But that's the base. And again, like the base does all the work, I kid you not. Picking up those Spawn, again, here's my biggest issue with this, is not the fact it wasn't approached properly, but I do think right away that this should have been deliberately made as a statue. Forget the whole idea that this is supposed to be an articulated figure. Do away with that mindset altogether. Instead, this should have only solely been a statue right from day one. If you can actually see it, I'm going to peel away the layers. There's actually Spawn's face. It's really hard to, in fact, make out the fact he's got these glowing yellow eyes because, especially when you're seeing it from the side, really the only part that you're making out is actually his mouth. But if you were to move away the top collar of his cape, you can see some decently sculpted face for Spawn. It kind of looks like he has his tongue sticking out. It almost looks as if perhaps, maybe it is a tongue, I don't know. It almost even looks like it's like a bug or something, like a maggot crawling into his mouth. That's rather gruesome. Speaking of gruesome, you can also see there's some exposed flesh colored in a different color than the rest of his face. And again, if we just move his arm out of the way, everything is sort of just kind of, it's feeling like he's being wrapped by a boa constrictor. Everything is really tight on the figure. It's not really until you peel away again the layers that you see, like there's an arm actually underneath all that. And for reasons really unknown, they actually did make the arm articulated. There's shoulder articulation. Well, again, we'll talk more about that in a second. This is the arm that kind of drapes in front of him in the front of the comic cover. So again, really, when you're seeing him, you're only seeing him kind of right from the side like this. The cape is actually inside of his grip. Although the time that I've actually had this stored away, he's less holding the cape, as the cape is basically just draped around his hand. There's some decent sculpting. One thing you'll may notice also already, and one of the reasons why many people call this also Halloween Spawn, is the fact that they chose orange to go with the cape. This is, of course, the colors that he has also in that issue, that image on the front of the cover. He goes more with the orange than he does the red. So again, instead of having more of the traditional red cape, you've got kind of a more darker orange cape on the inside and these lighter colors that they've added to the front where basically like the moonlight is hitting the side of it. I do think that this is approached nicely, but unfortunately just by the nature of it, just to look at the cape, how much further down it goes from actually his feet. Underneath it, again, he does have all the detail you would expect to see from Spawn. He's got chains there on his bicep. He's got the spiked gauntlet on the other. And again, he also even has the spikes on his hand. The little belt, of course, the little belt buckle skull. And of course, Spawn's always got to have pockets. He's got pockets there on the side of his thigh, too. I mean, for what it is, he actually does come across as a decent-looking Spawn. He's probably a little more on the malnourished side. Spawn, I think, needs to eat a little bit more. But he's actually a pretty articulated figure, which defeats the purpose of this figure, I feel, completely. For the articulation, by the way, in fact, let's actually look at it right now. The head is on a ball joint, so it actually moves up, down, back, and forth. Why it does, I have no idea. The shoulders, in both the cases, actually do hinge back and forth. You can move the arms back and forth this way. The figure has a bicep swivel, a single hinge on the elbow, and he also has articulation. I think he has articulation here on the hand as well. The upper torso is also on a ball joint. The legs do, they don't split out necessarily. There seems like a ball joint on the one side. Maybe there's actually a ball joint also on the other side, but pretty much null and void, really, when you think about it. He has a swivel at about 3/4 of the way, or even half the way up the thigh, and then the figure also has a double hinge on the knee. And then he also has toe articulation as well. One with the big clunking boot guard that he has with all the spikes. And then the other one has a slightly smaller version of that, more little bands of spikes than anything else. And again, he has the articulation in both the cases. But really, why would you have taken the time to put all this articulation in the figure when, first of all, he's only supposed to be designed to be displayed one way? It's kind of like this way here. And then with all the cape, as soft of a plastic that they decided to go with. Really, again, I like the look of the cape, the way they've sort of got it layered on top of each other. Kind of like when you go in a Subway and you're asking for extra meat. That's the way they sort of fold. I think also Arby's does this as well. They deliberately sort of crimp. They kind of fold in the meat, so there looks like there's a lot more than just laying it flat. Why am I comparing Spawn's cape to Arby's sandwiches? Kind of does look a little bit like an Arby's sandwich. But again, with the cape being as long as it is, there's no way you can actually have Spawn displayed on his own. You kind of have to, like what I'm doing right now, you kind of have to bend the knee back a little bit. If, for example, you do want to have Spawn standing on his own, in theory, it is possible. In fact, if I move the tree out of the way, you can see he's standing freely on his own. But there's only time will only tell as to how long this will actually stand on its own. The true way to actually displaying this also has it closer to the way it looks in the actual comic cover is by actually having Spawn resting against this part of the tree. The tree is literally just consoling Spawn. And then when you rest it against the tree, that's the way it's supposed to look based in on the comic cover. If you spin, though, the figure around, well, one thing you may know is very apparent is that the feet, unfortunately, don't really touch the ground. If you were to have Spawn a little bit closer to the ground, then it seems to off-kelter the weight of him, and he's more likely to fall. You can also have it a little bit higher up, too, which also does a good job of holding the figure up. And I'm only showing it really from the backside here so you can see. There's a lot of space then happening underneath his legs. Nobody really is going to be able to see this from the side of you displaying in the proper way. Nobody's going to be any bit the wiser that there's actually this much space happening underneath Spawn's feet. But then if you have it going the right way, the show side at least, it does actually look for it's a nice, interesting piece. Not one that I bring out every year. In fact, I only seem to bring it out, I think the last time I had it on display was a couple of Halloweens ago. I brought it out, I put it on display, and then I just put it back to free up a little bit more space for the regular figure lineup that I have. It's a great looking piece, but I don't think it should have ever been an action figure. Not one certainly that has posability. To put posability in there seems almost more ridiculous, because a piece like this was always, I feel, intended to be a statue, not a figure. Spawn Classic Covers issue 88 does a decent enough job of translating the original source material. Yeah, if I was to be a stickler to the details of the original comic cover, then I would maybe say the tree should have been a lot wider, should have actually stuck a little further forward, because it actually seems to stick a little further forward than what actually Spawn is standing. The colors of his face should actually have been a little bit more of a silhouette with glowing green eyes. I understand certainly why the team wanted to take an opportunity to sculpt in an actual realized face. But if it really was to match the classic comic cover, then really Spawn's face should have been all black with only glowing green eyes, with just a little bit of coloring kind of on the top where the moonlight's hitting it. The biggest detail I think is overlooked, unfortunately, if you were to reference this to the original comic cover, is where they've located the owl. The owl shouldn't actually be as high as he is. He should actually be, in fact, off the side limb, the limb that's holding, unfortunately, this poor figure upright. That's where the owl should have been, but understanding where they had to have Spawn resting against, it probably would have been a little bit too busy to put the owl there, and that's probably one of the reasons why they moved the owl a little bit higher than what it is. Now, again, to call this thing an action figure, I think is really doing a disservice to it. This should have been released right from day one as a statue, either as one piece, or if anything, release it as two parts where you would have had Spawn as something that would attach to the side of the tree. Just plug in, or I don't know, something along those lines. It should have never had articulation. It does a disservice to the term action figure, because even though they did put articulation in all the places where a Spawn figure should be articulated, it becomes null and void when you've got this big honkin' cape that takes up all the real estate space. Not to mention as well, when you look at obviously the back of this, it looks a little off. Obviously, you see Spawn is floating literally off the ground. In order to accommodate the look from the front, it sacrifices a little something on the back. Again, I feel like this should never been an action figure. I know we all like, as collectors, a little bit of action figure posability when it comes to these earlier Spawn releases, but let's face facts. This should have always been a statue right from day one. Have you ever had the chance to pick up issue 88 from the classic comic covers? That's a bit of a mouthful. If you have, let me know down below in the comments section what you guys think of it, or really just, again, based on this review. Should this have always been just a statue, or do you actually like the idea that they put articulation points in there that you just can't use with the figure anyways? Also, if you enjoyed this video, hit it with a like. If you're loving the content you're seeing and have been seeing as of late during the month of Spottober, then make sure if you haven't already done so that you hit the subscribe button down below and turn on the bell notification. While we have wrapped up right now the review of classic comic covers, going to try to get that out. Issue 88 Spawn. There's definitely still going to be a lot more spookerific reviews coming your way in the pretty soon-to-be future. I mean, it's just right around the corner. We have only this month to churn out a whole bunch of spooky spots. And rest assured, there's going to be a lot more coming your way. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.